much about the industrial agricultural model I could talk about. I'm going to focus on only one aspect, the privatization of genetic resources. There are many, many theories which we use in order to understand what is happening globally. International trade agreements, international finance. One of them is the privatization of U.S. foreign policy under philanthropic organizations like the Gates Foundation. But I'm only going to focus on one small corner of theory, which is accumulation by dispossession. And the first question is, why should we be interested in this theory? Accumulation by dispossession is grounded in Karl Marx's theory of primitive accumulation. Old, dusty, probably even mildew theory from the 19th century. Why should we possibly be interested? What I have found in the theory is that they are addressing the removal of agriculture, agricultural producers from land, so they're discussing the displacement of producers, and they're also discussing the consolidation of privatized control over bioresources. This is a hugely important issue around the world, and I suggest that these two acts, these two processes, removal of smallholder producers and privatization of genetic resources, affect billions of people around the world. So I do consider the debates to be very important, and they tend to make sense of some of the processes, not in description, but in interpretive and explanatory ways. So those of you, I'll even be so bold as to suggest, those of you who are interested in anti-essentialist readings when it comes to the economy or inequality or justice, I still think you would find insight in understanding and certainly dynamic analysis if you looked at accumulation by dispossession. The sets of theories are not linear, they're interactive, and furthermore, they're fun because they're highly controversial. The basic components of the theory, as I mentioned, are based in primitive accumulation, and it is one of the ideas that Karl Marx had that is still heralded today as one of his most brilliant breaks with neoclassical political economy. He's breaking with Adam Smith, Ricardo, and all the rest, and saying capitalism doesn't occur simply when there's an accumulation of wealth or a sufficient accumulation of wealth. It occurs through the changing of the social relations of production. The social property relations are what are distinctive about capitalism. It is these dynamic changes which then can begin the imperative of competition, profit maximization, and the compulsion to reinvest. So that you have primitive accumulation written about and analyzed by Karl Marx, and you all know it well, the land enclosures in England. The dates are about from the 1500s. It really started in the 1600s through the 1900s. So about 400 years of enclosure of land in England. Land is still an issue in southern Africa. South Africa did not become free until 1994. Zimbabwe not until 1980. So a lot of the things about enclosure of land written about relating to England are quite relevant today in southern Africa. But we need to bring the dusty, moldy theories up to date. And so not only do we look at the change and the relations of production among producers and non-producers, but we are also looking at the relations of humans to nature, to the environment. So that accumulation by dispossession also brings in the relation of the human beings to their environment. Why is it emerging now? What is happening? And again, political economists approach theory in a historical way. We do think these new expressions of primitive accumulation, accumulation by dispossession, are coming because of the crises of capitalism. This talk is easier to give today than it would have been in August. Okay. What we see from the materialist point of view is a crisis of over-accumulation, and just a couple of quick examples in our daily lives. When 9/11 happened, we were all told to go shopping, okay? In other words, the consumption of the United States has been driving the production side, but the Americans are not consuming enough. One of the ways in which that was encouraged from the 1970s is to give us massive amounts of credit, okay? The ability to get credit through your credit card or any other way was to increase the consumption. But it hasn't been keeping up. Another quick example from contemporary ideas is that US and other corporations went into China for cheap labor. There's been very little movement to help the Chinese worker become a consumer. So you have mainly, nothing is ever one thing, but mainly in China, at least at this stage, for the cheap labor. So the crisis of capitalism is a crisis of overaccumulation. The rate of profit is down, and it creates an impetus, therefore, it creates very rational reasons to acquire inputs that are cheaper and sometimes even free. So you go for genetic resources or you go for minerals that can be free raw material inputs. This crisis of capitalism is also quite related to the crisis of industrial agriculture. One of the, as I said, there's many components to that. One that I haven't mentioned is industrial agriculture keeps breeding for more and more specific traits until they get the perfect beef cattle for us to eat or the perfect chicken for us to eat. But once they get the perfect beef cattle, they can't interbreed it, okay? Because it then has all the effects as if you and I bred with our brothers and sisters. So industrial agriculture has to keep going back to the genetic plant material of diversity to then rebreed again for another close semblance of cattle. The FAO contends that you need at least 100 varieties within one species for viable breeding. Our cattle, our dairy cattle, are down to something like 30. We're way below what is considered viable. So the involution, the loss of genetic diversity, is a crisis in industrial capitalism. Industrial agriculture and industrial capitalism. That also sends corporations overseas looking for new biodiversity, new gene pools, ones that have been untapped. To ameliorate this crisis, the corporations also, and the current word we have in neoliberal theories is privatization. The privatization of everything, and all of you have read about it, teach about it, you know all about it. So that you're privatizing water, you're privatizing healthcare, privatizing security in Iraq. What the theories and materialist tradition do, call it, is accumulation by dispossession. And some of the theorists, just to give you some of the names, are David Hardy, Michael Perlman, Massimo De Angelis, Ellen Wood, and James Glassman. They consider it more than simply acquiring new wealth for greater investment. In other words, go take the genetic diversity of Zimbabwean cattle through a frozen embryo. It's more than just trying to get that embryo to acquire wealth, but it is more important changing, back to my comment, the social relations of production. The research question then, the central organizing research question is, are global corporations trying to remove the ability of smallholder farmers in southern Africa to control their production of food?